Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett is in Brook Park, Ohio. Major, good to see you. Both Rubio and Kasich's home states are heading to the polls today, obviously. The pair has won one state between them. Is it do or die for them at this point?
Absolutely. A defeat for either or both means the effective end of their presidential campaigns. No one can credibly run for the presidency of the United States without carrying their home state in a primary. It just doesn't happen. And for Rubio, it is a very, very steep climb. He was beginning to move late last week toward Donald Trump, getting within the very ragged edges of the margin of error, 7, 8, 9 points, depending on the polling survey. But over the weekend, something happened that was transformative of that race. And now Rubio, in a great number of surveys, is now 15, 20 points behind Trump and could finish a deeply disappointing third in Florida. Very different story here in Ohio. John Kasich, the sitting governor, popular, won re-election in a landslide 2 years ago, and believes, has confidently predicted, he will win the state of Ohio, grab all 66 of its delegates in the winner-take-all format, and thereby change the underlying mathematics of this race, number one, and for his campaign, number two, give him his first victory, and he believes a means by which to present himself to a Republican establishment desperate to find one, an alternative to Donald Trump.
Okay, let me throw a wrench in this, because when attempting to read the tea leaves, polls are just one factor, right? There are other things to consider, and I know a number of the polls, some of them have Marco Rubio trailing Trump by 20 points, as you mentioned, and Kasich up by about 4. But let's consider some other things, like in Florida, a lot of early voters, perhaps certain people vote a certain way and they like to vote early. And in Ohio, you know, they have an open primary. So if you're a Democrat, you can vote if you'd like. And could that maybe factor in and maybe turn these polls on their heads?
Absolutely, especially here in Ohio, because I think that's the more fascinating of the two races. Because, yes, polling data can be wrong, but it's typically not wrong by a factor of 15 to 20 points. And as every experienced campaign operative will tell a candidate that they work for, believe the data doesn't lie. And its trajectories are important, and the trajectories in Florida have been very much against Marco Rubio the last 72 hours. But here in Ohio, to your point, yes, it's an open primary, number one, and Democrats, particularly in southeastern Ohio, have been re-registering in quite considerable numbers over the last couple of weeks, changing from Democrat to Republican. And if that pattern repeats itself in Ohio the way it has in other states where we've seen Democrats changing their registration, a good percentage of those voters are doing so to vote for Donald Trump. And there's a very high expectation within the Trump campaign that that's precisely what's happening here in Ohio. So they believe that shift in registration and Democrats being more interested, at least some Democrats, blue-collar Democrats principally, more interested in the Trump campaign, are re-registering for exactly that region. So I'm going to watch tonight what are the returns from southern Ohio, particularly in southeastern Ohio, because if they're heavily and solidly for Trump, that will be a very positive indicator for his campaign.
Major, if Trump sweeps the states today, does that mean he's locked up the nomination?
He hasn't locked it up as a matter of pure mathematics, but he has created for himself, first of all, a bigger lead in delegates, because that is a winner-take-all state in Florida, 99 delegates, 66 here in Ohio, as I mentioned just a moment ago. All of those go to Trump. Second place doesn't get you any delegates. And the thing that Ted Cruz is going to keep an eye on tonight is Illinois, North Carolina, and Missouri, which distribute their delegates proportionally. So a strong second place means you don't win, but does mean you get a good chunk of delegates. And that's all that Cruz is about, assembling delegates wherever he can. But if Trump gets 99 in Florida, 66 in Ohio, he jumps well ahead of Cruz. And also, those are two enormously important swing states, very important in the conversation of Republican presidential politics historically. It is unquestionably true that Trump has had 2 very bad weeks on the campaign trail, in addition to being denounced by establishment figures within the party, led by Mitt Romney, but certainly not exclusive to Mitt Romney in condemning Trump and his campaign, and dealing with all the unrest and turmoil we've seen on the campaign trail at Trump rallies in the last 3 to 4 days. If he were to withstand all of that, plus the negative advertising that you see quite commonly here in Ohio and has been blanketing the airways in Florida, if he withstands all of that and still wins 2 very important states on the Republican primary calendar, not only will he have the math on his side, he'll have a tremendous boost of momentum. So a clean sweep tonight would not clinch the nomination, but it would come very close to making Donald Trump the presumptive Republican nominee.
Major Garrett in Brook Park, Ohio. Thanks so much, Major.
My pleasure.